Yo, what's good? It's Minstora. Today, y'all, we're asking the question, does Baldur's Gate 3 have a shot at Game of the Year for the Game Awards? This video is going to be more so casual in nature, right? I have a few points to hit, but I don't have anything specific in terms of like a script or what I'm going to say or how I'm going to say it, right? Just kind of got a few points to go over. We're going to have fun with this topic, with this discussion, right? For me, just based on early access alone and what I've played, I do think that BG3 has a great shot of being my personal game of the year, but games like Dead Space Remake and Resident Evil 4 Remake are going to be tough competition to beat. And that's just games that have already come out so far this year. We've got tons of crazy titles releasing that are yet to come later on this year. So it's a tough competition, but for me personally, I do think Baldur's Gate 3 has a good shot at being my personal game of the year. But today I'm more so talking about, does it have a chance at specifically winning, again, Game of the Year for the Game Awards? Now, before you get to snapping at me based on what this video is about, obviously, I'm aware that this game is in early access and we can't call it Game of the Year yet, right? We don't even have the full game. Obviously, I am aware of that. A big chunk of this video is just wondering if it's even possible for Baldur's Gate 3 to earn the title to begin with. Like, even if the game turns out to be absolutely amazing, we got to consider things like Larian isn't a AAA studio. A CRPG has never won Game of the Year before. And like I said, that this year is incredibly stacked with quality titles that have already come out and are yet to come. So it's less about like, oh, is Baldur's Gate 3 good enough to win Game of the Year? We can't decide that yet. We're just talking like, if it turns out to be absolutely mind-blowingly amazing, can it even win Game of the Year with kind of those factors, considering those factors, right? Plus, it's just simply fun to speculate and talk about this kind of stuff. So I'm going to make the dang video, all right? So with that being said, let's jump into it. You know, the first things first, I want to talk about how the release date of Baldur's Gate 3 at least seems to be doing the game some favors, right? It is perfect as it would be fresh in the panelist's mind around the time of consideration for the Game Awards, right? The game comes out August 31st, and the Game Awards itself happens around December. Actually, no, it happens in December every year, if I recall correctly, right? So that it isn't going to be as fresh in their minds as something like God of War Ragnarok was. That came out like right before the Game Awards and not too long before the Game Awards popped off. But it is going to be coming out a few months before then. It's going to have a nice chunk of time to kind of sit in everyone's mind and leave impressions. However, this may not be that big of a factor to even begin with, right? Elden Ring won last year for the Game Awards, and that was in early 2022 video game release, and it ended up taking the entire thing. So who knows? Maybe this isn't as big of a factor, but if it is, if it turns out to be somewhat important in the decision-making process, I would say that the release date is probably as good as Baldur's Gate 3 could ask for. Another thing is that Game of the Year is decided by two factors. There's 100 panelists, and there's, you know, the people, me and you, our votes on the Game Awards website that determines most of the categories that rewards are handed out for, right? But it's actually split up by 90% of the panelists vote decides the game, and then that remaining 10% is based on our popular vote. So any or most of the given categories that win, like RPG of the year, action game of the year, family game of the year, what have you, all including game of the year, right? Those are all going to be decided by 10% of our votes and 90% of what the panelists think. So I also think that's going to play a big factor as a game like Baldur's Gate 3. While I think it's becoming less and less of a niche as time goes on and more people get into RPGs and D&D proper, it isn't still kind of a mainline popular game, right? I don't think even just comparing to other RPGs, it isn't gonna be as popular, I don't think, as something Bethesda would make, for example, as Starfield or as a Final Fantasy, right? It still isn't as well known. It isn't as much of a household name as some of these other titles and RPGs. So the fact that all this isn't decided by a popular vote entirely, I think is kind of helping BG3 out just a little bit, right? Just a little bit, right? The next thing I want to talk about is we got to take a look at previous winners as well, right? We'll start in 2014, the first Game Awards, and the first winner of Game of the Year for the TGA was Dragon Age Inquisition. So, all right, we got an RPG as the very first Game of the Year winner. So that leaves things looking good, all right? That leaves things looking pretty good. But RPGs are for sure not the prominent winners of these awards, right? In 2015, we have The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, okay, another RPG. But in 2016, Game of the Year was Overwatch. 2017, Breath of the Wild, so an adventure game, unsurprisingly though, right? Even though Breath of the Wild isn't my cup of tea, I definitely understand it getting the W that year. But again, that was an adventure game. In 2018, it was that year's God of War. In 2019, it was Sekiro. And I would say most FromSoft or most Soulsborne games, yes, you could probably consider them RPGs. But Sekiro's kind of on that balance because you play a given character and there's not as much customization of a character you create. I know a role-playing game could be fulfilling another character's role, but for me personally, Sekiro is kind of like flimsy in terms of is it an RPG or not. So in 2020, it was Last of Us Part 2. In 2021, it was It Takes Two. And then in 2022, of course, the winner was Elden Ring, right? So with that track record in mind, I would say, yeah, I don't think most gamers would be surprised by a CRPG taking the title, considering that some of the other games that have won have been RPGs. And, you know, Larian has also already been present at TGA before in nominations for Divinity Original Sin 2. And while that is my favorite RPG of all time, like, you know, come on, let's be real. Baldur's Gate 3 is just miles better than Divinity Original Sin 2. And I actually didn't get into D&D until Baldur's Gate 3. So there's no real D&D or Dungeons and Dragons bias there. Come on, BG3 just clearly shows the development team's improvements, right? So I would be shocked to see Baldur's Gate 3 at least not get nominated. That would legitimately shock me. So looking at the previous winners and the fact that Larian Studio has already been present at these awards, it'll probably be nominated in similar categories as Divinity Original Sin 2, but the question is, can it squeeze into Game of the Year this time around? Given what we've got so far in this discussion, I think its chances are looking all right, right? It's Divinity Original Sin 2 has already been present at the awards, and Baldur's Gate 3 is just of such a higher quality so far. So I mean, yeah, like I definitely think it has a shot to at least sneak in there. Next, let's look at some of the competition from this year, right? You know, let's take a look at some of the competition that it's got for this year in general, not just for Game of the Year, but just in general, some of the crazy stuff we have coming this year, right? We've already mentioned that what I find to be some of the biggest competition so far out of games that have come out are things like the Dead Space remake and Resident Evil 4 remake. Already talked about those. But, you know, there's still games that have yet to come out that it does have some stiff competition, right? One of the biggest direct competitors being Starfield by Bethesda, right? Another massive RPG that is set to release this year, set in space, right? A space RPG made by Bethesda, a household RPG name, big backing, big like fan following in that studio, and it's being marketed very similarly to Baldur's Gate 3, a very freedom-based, do whatever you want to do, approach the story however you would like to kind of game. So they're kind of clashing a bit there. And actually, I mean, I had this later in my notes, but I forgot to mention previously, Hogwarts Legacy already came out and was also a really good game. Damn good, right? Another fantastic RPG that released earlier this year. Like, the amount of love and attention to detail that went into that game for Harry Potter fans was just insane, right? They went out of their way to craft Hogwarts, even with stuff that wasn't in the movies and didn't appear visually at all. Like, things that were only mentioned in the books, it was all there in this game. The combat was fun with great mini games that I do wish we got to play more of. And again, you know, you throw in an open world full of fun stuff to do, and that's some really stiff competition for BG3 yet again. The major difference within Hogwarts Legacy compared to Baldur's Gate 3 is while you do get a lot of choice in Hogwarts Legacy, you don't get to make all that much of choices that impact the narrative, at least not on the same level that Baldur's Gate 3 has already demonstrated so far in its early access. So yeah, that is one area I would say Baldur's Gate 3 has Hogwarts Legacy beat. So while Baldur's Gate 3 does have some intense RPG competition this year, I feel like it's safe to say it's got at least Hogwarts Legacy beat. I feel like that's pretty safe to say, right? In addition to that, man, it's got some heavy RPG hitters to go up against. Final Fantasy 16 and Diablo 4 both come out this year. Yikes. For BG3, that's tough. That's rough. Even in just the best RPG category, not even Game of the Year, right? Where Divinity Original Sin 2 showed up in role-playing Game of the Year. That's tough. That is a tough little bracket it's got to go through, man. You know, it's some incredibly tough competition. And like I said, if it was popular vote, I would say BG3 has like no chance against those giants, simply because those franchises are so much more popular. But it's still scary. It's still really scary. Like I guess like as we're talking about this now, the question is, man, some people are going to start wondering, well, can Baldur's Gate 3 even win RPG of the year? Because obviously I think it has, if it can't win RPG of the year, it's not going to hold up for winning Game of the Year. Duh, right? Like that makes sense. So it's going to have a hell of a fight coming its way for sure. Outside of RPGs, there's just the absolute juggernaut, going again back to Game of the Year, not so much role-playing Game of the Year. There's this massive beast of a game that's going to be Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which is the sequel to 2017's winner Breath of the Wild. Bro, Breath of the Wild took the world by storm, and it looks like Tears of the Kingdom is slated to do the exact same thing. So, and Breath of the Wild, by the way, won Game of the Year with not being the best game performance-wise on the Switch console. So, I mean, this is a game that won literally not even at its full power level, and Breath of the Wild won. So what does that say for its sequel, right? That's rough. So I think earlier on in this video, in this discussion video, we started out a little more hopeful, but now that we've come around to discussing some of the game's competition, might be looking a little less hopeful, right? And that's not even every major release that BG3 is going up against this year, right? That's just some of them. So yeah, if there's anything that's giving me doubts about Baldur's Gate 3 taking home the big title this year, it's that insane competition. It's going to have a hard enough time winning within its own role-playing game category against all these great games, let alone fighting outside of its genre. So as of right now, I'll say if it wants to squeak out the win, it's looking unlikely. I would, based on what we've discussed so far, I would say right now, I am surprised. I am surprised in two things. I would be surprised if Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't get a hell of a ton of nominations. I would be insanely surprised. But at the same time, at this point, I would say I would be surprised if Baldur's Gate did win Game of the Year. I really would. It winning RPG of the Year, again, based on the panelists, I would say wouldn't surprise me as much, right? Winning RPG of the Year, even going against Final Fantasy 16 and going against Diablo 4 and Starfield, it wouldn't surprise me as much, I would say. It winning RPG of the Year, it wouldn't surprise me because one, Final Fantasy 16 is a big departure from what the rest of the series is like. But yeah, so one thing I will say though is that one thing Baldur's Gate 3 has going for it when compared to its previous game released by Larian Studios, which is Divinity Original Sin 2, is the backing of Wizards of the Coast this time around, man. WotC is putting some money into this thing. This game is an official collaboration between Larian Studios and Wizards of the Coast. So obviously there's a lot of official D&D money back in this game. So, it's had a lot more advertising behind it already, as well as being present at many more like gaming showcases and like the state of play for PlayStation and things like that. It's been more visible than Divinity Original Sin 2 was. So it has that going for it, as well as it's going to be releasing on PlayStation 5 and even potentially Xbox Series on launch, which is huge for a CRPG like this and rarely done, at least in my opinion, in modern gaming for this genre. A lot of CRPGs do eventually come to console, like Pillars of Eternity, again, DOS 2. But in recent years, to launch on consoles isn't the norm, I don't think, for a game like this. And I think it doing so is going to do it some good at getting it in the hands of as many gamers as possible and increasing its chances of winning. But that, unfortunately, isn't exclusive to this game, as some of the other big RPGs this year will be coming to both consoles and PC, but it does at least help. And the last thing I'll say is that in spite of all this, right? In spite of all this, I firmly agree with 2021, I believe, is Game of the Year, that being It Takes Two. That was an incredible game. That was an absolutely mind-blowing game. And I think most gamers were surprised when It Takes Two won. I think they were like, what? This like little cutesy kind of game, what the heck is this, right? I think a lot of gamers were surprised, and I think that shows that TGA, the Game Awards, is not shy to just go against the popular opinion and pick the game they think, at least a panelist, to pick the game they think deserves the title. So with that being said, I absolutely think Baldur's Gate 3 has a shot at winning it this year. How big of a shot that is, again, it would surprise me for it to win Game of the Year. It would not surprise me for Baldur's Gate 3 to win Role-Playing Game of the Year. So that's, I know that it's in a quantifiable number, but that's like summarizes what kind of shot I think it has. But in summary, yes, Baldur's Gate 3 absolutely has a shot at Game of the Year. It would be another It Takes Two situation where it catches a lot of people by surprise. I think it's I don't think it's gonna it's not gonna catch anyone by surprise being nominated for Game of the Year. I don't think so. But even that, to me, like, wow, that'd be pretty impressive for it to be nominated for Game of the Year. But it would be another It Takes Two moment. You'd be like, wow, it catch a lot of people off guard. But given that a game like It Takes Two has won already, I definitely think Baldur's Gate 3 has a shot. And that's gonna do it for today's video, guys. Put in the comments below. Wow, that was awkward. But go ahead and put in the comments below and let me know how many times I said Baldur's Gate 3 throughout this video. I'm sure it was a ton of times. I just didn't know. Should I abbreviate the thing? Should I say the whole title out loud? But yeah, man, that's gonna do it for this video, y'all. Just a fun little discussion. These are the kind of videos I like doing the most, man. It's nice to kind of just relax, kick back, and have a discussion with all you guys and some of my thoughts on gaming and what's going on in the gaming sphere nowadays, man. But let me know what you guys say. Comment below. Factor in some of the games you've already played, games you've played on early access that are scheduled to fully release this year, games that have already fully come out this year. And based on what we have yet to look forward to, let me know what you think has the most plausible shot at taking Game of the Year for the Game Awards. And also let me know, do you think Baldur's Gate 3 actually has a shot at taking home the championship belt this year? My name's been Store, man. Appreciate y'all coming through and watching and sticking out this far through to the end of the video. As always, y'all be easy, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.